The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned warehouse district as Maria Santos adjusted her earpiece one final time. She had been working undercover for 8 months, infiltrating the arms trafficking ring that had eluded federal authorities for years. Her handler's voice crackled through the communication device, reminding her that backup was positioned 3 blocks away, ready to move on her signal. Maria's heart pounded as she approached the designated meeting point. The intelligence she had gathered over the past months painted a picture of a sophisticated operation led by Viktor Kozlov, a former military officer who had gone rogue after the fall of the Soviet Union. His network stretched across international borders, supplying weapons to the highest bidders without regard for the consequences. The warehouse stood like a concrete monument to urban decay, its broken windows staring down at her like hollow eyes. Maria had convinced Kozlov's lieutenant that she represented a group of buyers from South America, interested in purchasing a significant cache of military-grade weapons. The story had taken months to build, requiring her to create an entire, false identity, complete with financial records and criminal connections. As she stepped through the rusted metal door, the smell of motor oil and dampness filled her nostrils. The interior was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights hanging from chains attached to the high ceiling. Stacks of wooden crates lined the walls, some marked with Cyrillic text that she had learned to read during her preparation for this assignment. 3 men waited for her in the center of the warehouse. She recognized Dmitry Volkov from surveillance photos, Kozlov's right-hand man known for his ruthless efficiency in eliminating problems. The other 2 were muscle, their hands resting casually near concealed weapons beneath their jackets. Maria forced herself to maintain the confident swagger of someone accustomed to dealing in illegal arms. The negotiation began smoothly. Maria inspected sample weapons while Dmitry quoted prices that made her internally wince at the devastation these tools could cause in the wrong hands. She played her role perfectly, asking technical questions about ammunition compatibility and delivery schedules. Her wire was recording everything, building the case that would finally bring down this network. But something felt wrong. Dmitry's eyes seemed too calculating, his questions too probing. When he asked about her previous suppliers in Colombia, Maria noticed how his hand moved slightly closer to his weapon. The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, the exits more distant. Her training kicked in as she realized that her cover might have been compromised. The tension in the air grew thick as Dmitry made a phone call in rapid Russian. Maria caught enough words to understand that he was verifying her identity through sources she had hoped would never be contacted. Her pulse quickened as she maintained her facade, knowing that any sign of nervousness could trigger a violent response from the armed men surrounding her. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited for the call to end. Maria's mind raced through escape scenarios while her hand subtly moved toward the panic button hidden in her jacket pocket. The backup team was too far away to help if things went wrong immediately, but she needed to signal them about the danger she was sensing. When Dmitry hung up the phone, his expression had changed completely. The businesslike demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold smile that made Maria's blood run cold. He spoke quietly to his companions in Russian, and she watched as they positioned themselves to block her potential escape routes. The game was up and she was trapped in a concrete tomb with 3 killers who now knew exactly who she really was. Dmitry's voice cut through the warehouse silence like a blade. He spoke in perfect English now, dropping the heavy accent he had maintained throughout their previous meetings. Maria realized that even his language barrier had been part of an elaborate performance, designed to make her underestimate his intelligence and awareness. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her months of careful preparation, the sleepless nights building her cover story, the dangerous meetings with criminals to establish credibility had all been for nothing. Somehow they had known about her from the beginning. The question that terrified her most was whether they had been feeding her false information all along, or if this was a recent discovery. Maria's training at Quantico had prepared her for this moment, but theory felt inadequate when facing 3 armed men who had already decided her fate. She could see it in their eyes, the cold calculation of predators who had found their prey cornered. Dmitry gestured for his men to search her, and rough hands patted down her jacket, quickly finding the wire and the panic button she had never gotten the chance to use. The recording device was crushed under Dmitri's boot with a grinding sound that seemed to echo endlessly in the vast space. Maria watched 8 months of evidence disappear in seconds, knowing that without her testimony, the case against Kozlov's organization would crumble. Worse than professional failure was the realization that other agents might walk into the same trap, unaware that their intelligence had been compromised. Dmitri held up her panic button, examining it with the interest of someone studying an insect. He explained how they had suspected federal surveillance for months, carefully watching for signs of infiltration. Maria's cover had been better than most, he admitted, but a routine background check through their contacts in Eastern Europe had revealed inconsistencies in her fabricated history that a less thorough criminal organization might have missed. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Maria processed the implications of his words. The backup team waiting 3 blocks away had no idea that their operation had been blown. They would wait for her signal, unaware that she was trapped and fighting for her life. Standard protocol dictated that they would maintain position for 6 hours before initiating emergency procedures. Far too long for her current situation. Maria tried to buy time by engaging Dmitri in conversation about their security measures, hoping to learn something that might help other agents avoid the same fate. But he was too experienced to reveal operational details to someone he planned to eliminate. Instead, he seemed to enjoy explaining how they had tracked her movements, identified her real name, and even discovered the location of her actual apartment. The psychological warfare was deliberate and effective. Maria felt her professional confidence cracking as she realized how thoroughly they had penetrated her mission. Dmitri mentioned specific details about her personal life that should have been classified, including the name of her younger brother who lived across the country. The threat was implicit but clear. Her life was not the only one hanging in the balance. As the interrogation continued, Maria began to understand the true scope of Kozlov's organization. They were not just arms dealers but had developed an extensive intelligence network that rivaled government agencies. The warehouse was more than a storage facility. It was a fortress designed to contain and eliminate threats to their operation. The sound of approaching vehicles outside made all 3 men tense. Dmitri checked his watch and spoke rapidly into a radio, coordinating with unseen allies who were apparently arriving ahead of schedule. Maria realized that her situation was about to become even more desperate as additional enemies entered the equation, and her chances of survival diminished with each passing minute. The heavy footsteps echoing through the warehouse announced the arrival of Viktor Kozlov himself. Maria had studied his photograph countless times, but seeing him in person revealed details that surveillance images could never capture. He moved with the precise bearing of a career military officer, his eyes scanning the environment with the automatic awareness of someone who had survived decades in hostile territory. Kozlov spoke to Dmitri in rapid Russian, his tone suggesting displeasure with the current situation. Maria caught fragments of the conversation, enough to understand that her capture had accelerated their timeline for something much larger than a simple arms deal. The presence of a federal agent in their operation meant that law enforcement was closer than they had anticipated, requiring immediate action to protect their network. 2 additional men accompanied Kozlov, both carrying equipment that Maria recognized from her counter-terrorism training. They began setting up what appeared to be a portable communication jamming device, effectively cutting off any chance that her backup team might track her location through electronic signals. The warehouse was becoming an electronic dead zone, invisible to the outside world. Maria watched as they transformed the space into an improvised interrogation facility. Kozlov was clearly experienced in extracting information from unwilling subjects, directing his men with the efficiency of someone who had performed similar operations many times before. The realization that she was not their first federal victim sent chills down her spine. The questioning began with deceptively simple inquiries about her real identity and the extent of federal knowledge about their organization. Maria gave them nothing beyond her cover story, but Kozlov's questions revealed that they already knew far more about the investigation than she had feared. They mentioned other agents by name, including some she had never heard of, suggesting a security breach that went far beyond her compromised mission. Kozlov's interrogation techniques were sophisticated, combining psychological pressure with the implied threat of violence. He spoke about her family with disturbing accuracy, describing her brother's daily routine and her mother's health problems. The message was clear. Cooperation would protect not just her life but the lives of people she cared about most. As hours passed, Maria began to understand the true scope of what she had stumbled into. Kozlov's organization was not just selling weapons, but was actively involved in destabilizing operations across multiple countries. The intelligence she had gathered over the past months represented only a tiny fraction of their actual activities, and her capture had revealed to them exactly how much federal authorities knew about their operations. The warehouse grew colder as evening approached, and Maria realized that Kozlov was waiting for something specific before deciding her fate. Radio communications crackled intermittently as his men reported from various locations around the city, coordinating movements that suggested a major operation was already in motion. Her capture had become part of a larger plan that she was only beginning to comprehend. Dmitri returned from a phone call with news that made Kozlov's expression darken. Maria could not understand the Russian words, but the body language was clear enough. Something had gone wrong with their plans, and the pressure was mounting to extract information from her quickly. Before the situation deteriorated further, the interrogation intensified as Kozlov abandoned subtle psychological tactics in favor of more direct threats. Maria's training had prepared her for this escalation, but the reality of facing genuine violence was far different from classroom scenarios. She could see in his eyes that he was running out of patience and time, both of which were her only remaining resources. The sound of distant sirens made everyone in the warehouse freeze. Kozlov's radio erupted with urgent communications as his network reported increased police activity throughout the district. Maria felt a spark of hope, wondering if her backup team had finally realized something was wrong and initiated emergency protocols. But Kozlov's reaction suggested that law enforcement activity was related to something else entirely, another operation that was forcing his hand in ways she could not have anticipated. The radio chatter grew more frantic as reports flooded in from Kozlov's network. Maria listened carefully, her knowledge of Russian allowing her to piece together fragments of a crisis that was spiraling beyond their control. Multiple law enforcement agencies were coordinating raids across the city, targeting locations that were supposed to be unknown to federal authorities. Kozlov's face reflected a mixture of rage and calculation as he processed the reports. His carefully constructed network was under assault from multiple directions, and the timing suggested that Maria's mission had been part of a much larger coordinated operation. The realization that he had been outmaneuvered by federal authorities was clearly eating at his professional pride. Maria felt a surge of satisfaction despite her dire circumstances. Her months of undercover work had apparently provided enough intelligence for her colleagues to plan simultaneous strikes against Kozlov's entire organization. Even if she did not survive, her mission was achieving its ultimate objective of dismantling the arms trafficking network. But Kozlov was far from defeated. He barked orders to his men, initiating what appeared to be a predetermined escape protocol. Maria watched as they began destroying documents and computer equipment, eliminating evidence that could be used against surviving members of their organization. The efficiency of their response suggested that they had planned for this possibility. Dmitri approached Maria with rope and zip ties, preparing to secure her for transport. Kozlov had apparently decided that she was too valuable to eliminate immediately, but too dangerous to leave behind. Maria realized that they planned to take her with them as a hostage, insurance against federal pursuit or a source of information about ongoing investigations. The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos as Kozlov's men prepared for evacuation. Vehicles were being repositioned, equipment was being packed or destroyed, and escape routes were being confirmed through radio communications. Maria counted at least 8 different voices reporting from various locations, indicating that the organization was larger and more sophisticated than federal authorities had realized. As they prepared to move her, Maria made a desperate decision. She had memorized the radio frequencies they were using and had overheard enough coordination details to provide valuable intelligence to her backup team if she could somehow get word to them. The portable jamming device was focused on preventing outgoing communications, but it might not block all frequencies. Her chance came when Dmitri momentarily stepped away to help with equipment. Maria lunged toward a discarded radio that had been left on a nearby crate, hoping to broadcast a brief message before they could stop her. Her fingers found the transmission button just as hands grabbed her shoulders, but she managed to speak 2 words into the device before it was torn from her grasp. The violence of their reaction told Maria that her message had been transmitted. Kozlov struck her across the face with enough force to send her stumbling, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of multiple failures. His men secured her more roughly, using unnecessary force that reflected their frustration with the collapsing operation. But the damage was done. Maria had managed to transmit coordinates and a brief description of their situation before being silenced. Whether anyone was monitoring the frequency was another question, but she had done everything possible to alert authorities to her location and the ongoing evacuation. Kozlov made a final radio call, speaking in rapid Russian about changing to alternate extraction plans. Maria understood enough to realize that their primary escape route had been compromised, forcing them to use backup procedures that were apparently more dangerous or difficult. The net was closing around them, and desperation was beginning to drive their decisions. The sound of helicopters in the distance made everyone in the warehouse tense. Maria could not tell if they were law enforcement or news media, responding to the widespread police activity, but Kozlov's reaction suggested that any aerial surveillance posed a serious threat to their escape plans. Time was running out for both sides, and the next few minutes would determine whether justice or violence would prevail. The helicopters were getting closer, their rotor wash creating vibrations that Maria could feel through the concrete floor of the warehouse. Kozlov's men moved with increasing urgency, abandoning their methodical evacuation procedures in favor of grabbing only the most essential equipment and documents. The professional calm that had characterized their operation was dissolving into barely controlled panic. Maria found herself roughly dragged toward a service entrance at the rear of the warehouse, her hands secured behind her back with plastic restraints that cut into her wrists. Through broken windows, she could see the shadows of aircraft circling overhead, though she could not determine if they belonged to law enforcement or media outlets covering the unfolding drama. Kozlov's radio crackled with reports that painted a picture of systematic destruction of his network. Safe houses were being raided, financial accounts were being frozen, and key personnel were being arrested across multiple jurisdictions. The coordinated nature of the assault suggested that federal authorities had been planning this operation for months, using intelligence gathered by agents like Maria to map the entire organization. The realization that her mission had been successful even as she faced personal doom gave Maria strength to continue fighting. She deliberately stumbled and fell, forcing her captors to waste precious time getting her back on her feet. Every second of delay increased the chances that law enforcement would locate the warehouse before Kozlov could complete his escape. Dmitry was becoming increasingly agitated, as radio reports confirmed that several of their planned escape routes had been blocked by police checkpoints. The net was tightening around them, and their options were diminishing rapidly. Maria could see the desperation in their eyes as they realized that their carefully planned evacuation was falling apart. A new voice on the radio reported that federal agents had found and were approaching one of their secondary facilities. Kozlov's expression darkened as he realized that law enforcement had intelligence about locations that should have been completely secret. The scope of the federal operation was far beyond what he had anticipated, suggesting that Maria's mission had been one part of a much larger investigation. The warehouse suddenly shook as something heavy landed on the roof. Maria's heart leaped with hope as she recognized the sound of tactical teams rappelling from helicopters onto the building. Kozlov's men drew their weapons, preparing for a fight that they knew they could not win but were determined to make as costly as possible for their opponents. Kozlov made a rapid decision that changed everything. Instead of trying to fight their way out with Maria as a hostage, he ordered his men to eliminate her immediately and focus on their own escape. Maria watched in terror as Dmitry raised his weapon, knowing that her brief radio transmission had sealed her fate by accelerating the federal response. The first gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, followed immediately by the sound of tactical teams breaching multiple entrances simultaneously. Maria threw herself sideways, trying to make herself a smaller target as bullets began flying in multiple directions. The warehouse erupted into a firefight that transformed the concrete space into a deadly maze of ricocheting rounds and muzzle flashes. Maria hit the floor hard, pain shooting through her shoulder as she landed awkwardly with her hands still restrained behind her back. She could hear shouted commands from federal agents mixed with return fire from Kozlov's men, creating a cacophony of violence that seemed to go on forever. Smoke from weapons and tactical grenades began to fill the air, reducing visibility to a few feet. Rolling behind a stack of wooden crates, Maria tried to make herself invisible while the battle raged around her. She could hear Kozlov shouting orders in Russian, trying to coordinate a fighting withdrawal toward whatever escape route remained open. The tactical teams were professional and methodical, but Kozlov's men were desperate and had intimate knowledge of the warehouse layout. A grenade exploded somewhere near the main entrance, sending debris raining down from the ceiling and momentarily deafening everyone in the building. In the sudden quiet that followed, Maria could hear the sound of approaching sirens as additional law enforcement units responded to the firefight. The warehouse was becoming surrounded, cutting off any possibility of escape for the surviving criminals. The firefight intensified as more tactical teams entered the warehouse from multiple access points. Maria pressed herself against the concrete floor behind the wooden crates, feeling splinters rain down as bullets struck the wood above her head. The sound was deafening, a constant roar of automatic weapons fire punctuated by the sharp crack of sniper rifles from the roof. Through gaps in the crates, Maria could see muzzle flashes moving through the smoke-filled warehouse as federal agents advanced using coordinated team tactics. Kozlov's men were skilled fighters, but they were outnumbered and outgunned by specially trained units that had been preparing for this moment for months. The outcome was inevitable, but the criminals were making law enforcement pay for every inch of ground. A figure emerged from the smoke near Maria's hiding place, moving with the distinctive gait of someone who had been wounded. She recognized Dmitri, blood seeping through his jacket as he searched for an escape route that no longer existed. His eyes were wild with the desperation of a cornered animal, and Maria knew that he would kill her without hesitation if he discovered her location. The tactical radio chatter was becoming more organized as federal agents gained control of the situation. Maria heard her own name mentioned several times as teams coordinated their search for the missing undercover agent. Knowing that rescue was close gave her hope, but she also understood that the most dangerous moments often came at the end of operations like this, when wounded criminals made final desperate attempts to inflict maximum damage. Kozlov's voice cut through the chaos, shouting orders that Maria recognized as instructions to destroy remaining evidence and eliminate witnesses. The man had shifted from escape mode to scorched earth tactics, determined to prevent federal authorities from gaining additional intelligence even if it meant sacrificing his own men in the process. An explosion rocked the warehouse as someone detonated charges that had apparently been pre-positioned for exactly this scenario. Maria felt the shock wave pass through her body, followed by a rain of concrete debris from the damaged ceiling. The criminals were destroying their own facility rather than allowing it to fall into federal hands intact. Through the settling dust and smoke, Maria saw federal agents moving more aggressively, realizing that their targets were willing to bring down the entire building rather than surrender. The tactical teams accelerated their advance, knowing that every second of delay increased the risk of structural collapse that could trap everyone inside. Maria heard footsteps approaching her hiding place and held her breath, praying that they belonged to federal agents rather than surviving criminals. A tactical light pierced the smoke, followed by a voice calling her name in English. She responded immediately, identifying herself as loudly as possible, despite the risk of revealing her location to any remaining enemies. 2 federal agents reached her position within seconds, cutting the restraints from her wrists while maintaining defensive positions that protected all 3 of them from potential threats. Maria's relief was overwhelming as she realized that her ordeal was finally coming to an end. But the agents warned her that the building was unstable, and they needed to evacuate immediately. Supporting her between them, the agents began moving toward the nearest exit while radio reports confirmed that most of Kozlov's men had been neutralized or captured. The warehouse was becoming a death trap, as structural damage from the explosions threatened to cause a complete collapse, turning their rescue mission into a race against time. As they approached the exit, Maria heard a familiar voice shouting orders in Russian. Kozlov was still alive and apparently making a final stand near what had been their planned escape route. The sound of sustained gunfire suggested that he was not going quietly, forcing the tactical teams to maintain their assault even as the building began to show signs of imminent structural failure. The agents rushed Maria through a doorway just as another explosion shook the warehouse, sending cracks racing up the concrete walls. Behind them, the firefight continued as federal agents worked to capture or eliminate the remaining criminals before the building could collapse and destroy crucial evidence along with anyone still trapped inside. The cool evening air hit Maria's face like a blessing as the federal agents rushed her away from the collapsing warehouse. Behind them, the building groaned and twisted as structural supports failed under the damage from multiple explosions. Emergency vehicles lined the street, their flashing lights creating a surreal light show against the industrial landscape. Medical personnel immediately surrounded Maria, checking for injuries while federal commanders debriefed her about the situation inside the warehouse. Despite her exhaustion and trauma, she was able to provide crucial information about the number and positions of remaining criminals, helping the tactical teams complete their assault before the building's inevitable collapse. The final explosion was massive, sending a pillar of fire and debris into the night sky as the warehouse's remaining structure pancaked into rubble. Maria watched from the safety of an ambulance, knowing that her 8 months of undercover work had culminated in this moment of destruction that marked the end of Kozlov's arms trafficking network. Radio reports confirmed that Viktor Kozlov had been found dead in the wreckage, apparently killed when the ceiling collapsed during his final firefight with federal agents. Dmitry and most of his men had either been captured alive or neutralized during the assault, leaving only a handful of network members still at large in other cities where simultaneous raids were still ongoing. As paramedics treated her injuries, Maria learned the full scope of the operation that her intelligence had made possible. Coordinated raids in 12 cities had netted over 40 arrests, seized millions of dollars in weapons and cash, and disrupted trafficking routes that had supplied conflicts around the world. Her sacrifice had been worth the cost, saving countless lives that would have been lost to the weapons Kozlov's organization sold. The aftermath was a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and media attention that Maria had not anticipated. Her role in the operation could not be kept secret once prosecutors began building cases against the arrested criminals, making her a reluctant public figure in a story that captured international attention. Months later, as she testified in federal court against the surviving members of Kozlov's network, Maria reflected on the thin line between success and disaster that had defined her mission. Her brief radio transmission had been the difference between rescue and death, a few words that had guided federal agents to her location in time to prevent her execution. The trial revealed the true scope of what they had accomplished. Kozlov's network had been responsible for weapons transfers that fueled conflicts in over 20 countries, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in profits while contributing to instability and violence around the world. The successful destruction of the organization had disrupted arms trafficking on a global scale. Standing outside the courthouse after the final convictions were announced, Maria felt a sense of closure that had eluded her during the long months of recovery and legal proceedings. The warehouse where she had nearly died was now a memorial to the federal agents who had risked their lives to save her, and to all law enforcement officers who worked undercover to protect society from criminal organizations. Her radio call that night had become legendary within federal law enforcement circles, a reminder of how crucial communication could be in life or death situations. Training protocols were updated to include her experience, ensuring that future undercover agents would be better prepared for the moment when their covers were blown and survival depended on quick thinking under extreme pressure. Maria returned to active duty with a new assignment that built on her experience with international criminal networks. The work remained dangerous, but she carried with her the knowledge that even when operations went wrong, determination and training could turn disaster into victory. Her voice cutting through the radio static that night had proven that sometimes a few words were all that stood between justice and tragedy. The empty lot where the warehouse once stood was eventually converted into a community center, serving the neighborhood that had unknowingly harbored one of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations. Maria visited occasionally, remembering the night that had changed her life and reminded her why she had chosen a career dedicated to protecting others from those who would profit from violence and chaos.